There are moments in life when everything changes, when the world tilts on its axis, and nothing will ever be the same again. This is a story about one such moment, about a woman named Zara, who stood in a ballroom filled with strangers, wearing a dress that cost more than her mother's house, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her entire life. The chandeliers above scattered light like fallen stars, and around her, the city's elite laughed and danced with the careless joy of people who had never known struggle. But Zara felt something else that night, something cold and ancient, moving through the room, like a predator circling its prey. She didn't know it yet, but she was standing at the center of a battle that had already begun. A war fought not with weapons or words, but with forces older than civilization itself. Her hands trembled as she held a glass of champagne she couldn't taste, and across the room she felt eyes watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Those eyes belonged to a woman who had decided that Zara was a threat, a woman who would stop at nothing to destroy what she perceived as an invasion of her carefully constructed world. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand where Zara came from, who she was before the ballrooms and the champagne, and the man who would change everything. Zara grew up in a village where the sky stretched forever and the earth smelled of rain and possibility. Her childhood home was modest, but filled with the kind of wealth that can't be measured in money. Laughter that echoed through rooms, stories told by firelight, and a mother whose hands were rough from work, but gentle when they touched your face. Her father had passed when she was 7, leaving behind memories of a man who believed that integrity was the only inheritance worth giving. Her mother, Adana, became both parents after that, waking before dawn to arrange vegetables at the market, bargaining with customers who respected her honesty even when they complained about her prices. Zara would sit beside her after school, watching how her mother treated every person with dignity, regardless of whether they bought anything or not. The village itself was a tapestry of interconnected lives, where everyone knew your name, your struggles, your triumphs. Old women sat beneath baobab trees, sharing wisdom that had been passed down through generations, teaching the young ones that character was built in small moments, not grand gestures. Zara absorbed these lessons like soil absorbs water, letting them shape the foundation of who she would become. She was brilliant in school, the kind of student teachers whispered about in the staff room, with equal parts pride and concern, because brilliance without opportunity is just unfulfilled potential. But even then, even as a child solving mathematical problems that confused students twice her age, Zara never forgot the most important lesson her mother taught her. That lesson was simple but profound. A woman's true wealth is not what she owns, but who she is when no one is watching. Adana would say this while sorting through vegetables, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency, pulling aside the bruised ones to sell at a discount, rather than hiding them beneath the good ones. Zara saw how her mother could have cut corners, could have mixed the old produce with the new, and made more money. But she never did. This wasn't weakness. It was strength of a kind that can't be taught from books. As Zara grew older, and her mind expanded beyond the boundaries of the village, she began to understand the rarity of such integrity in a world that often rewarded the opposite. When she received the scholarship to study in the city, a partial scholarship that required her mother to sell her grandmother's silver bracelets to cover the rest, Adana pressed the enrollment papers into her daughter's hands, with tears streaming down her face. "Go," she said, "go and become everything you were meant to be. But never forget that success without character is just decoration on an empty house." Zara left the village with one suitcase, $300, and a heart full of dreams that felt too big for her chest to contain. The city was a shock to her system. Buildings that scraped the sky, cars moving in endless rivers of metal and noise, people dressed in clothes that announced their wealth with every thread. She lived in a tiny room she shared with two other girls, slept on a mattress on the floor, and learned to navigate a world where everything moved faster and cost more than she'd ever imagined. University was where Zara discovered that brilliance comes in many forms, but wisdom is rare. She studied business administration, devouring textbooks with the same hunger she'd once felt during lean seasons in the village. But while her classmates worried about which designer bag to buy or which exclusive club to join on weekends, Zara worked 3 jobs to keep herself afloat and send money home. She cleaned office buildings before dawn, arriving while the city still slept and leaving before anyone saw her face. She tutored wealthy children in the afternoons, watching them take for granted opportunities she would have killed for, teaching them concepts they barely cared to learn, while their parents paid her in cash, counted out with barely concealed condescension. And in the evenings, she waited tables at an upscale restaurant, where the appetizers cost more than her weekly food budget, smiling through comments from men who assumed a beautiful village girl must be available for the right price. But Zara had learned from her mother how to navigate disrespect with dignity, how to deflect without becoming hard, how to survive without losing yourself. Her beauty was undeniable, skin that glowed like polished mahogany, eyes that held depth and intelligence, a smile that could light up a room when she chose to share it. Men approached her constantly with offers and assumptions, but she had no interest in shortcuts that required her to compromise the values her mother had instilled. She graduated top of her class, an achievement that meant more to her than anyone around her could understand, because it represented not just her hard work, but her mother's sacrifice, her father's dreams, and the hopes of a village that had celebrated when she received that scholarship. After graduation, Zara found work at a mid-level marketing firm, where her ideas were often brilliant and occasionally stolen by senior colleagues who understood that talent without connections is easily exploited. She could have become bitter, could have learned to play the games that everyone around her seemed to play naturally. But something in her refused. Maybe it was her mother's voice in her head, reminding her that integrity is what you do when cutting corners would be easier. Maybe it was her own stubborn belief that good work would eventually be recognized. Or maybe it was simply that she couldn't look at herself in the mirror if she became the kind of person who succeeded by stepping on others. Whatever the reason, Zara continued to work with honesty and dedication, saving every penny she could, sending money home each month, even when it meant eating plain rice for days. She found joy in small things: a sunset viewed from the bus window, a phone call with her mother and brother, the satisfaction of solving a complex problem at work. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by external circumstances. Then came the charity gala, an event she attended only because her boss needed someone to represent the company, and everyone else had better plans. Zara borrowed a dress from a colleague, styled her own hair, and arrived at the hotel ballroom, feeling like an imposter among people who wore wealth like a second skin. She planned to stay for an hour, make an appearance, and leave quietly. But fate, as it often does, had different plans entirely. That's where she first saw Kofi Mensah, though she didn't know his name yet, or that he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. She just saw a man, standing alone at the edge of a crowded room, surrounded by people, but utterly isolated in a way she recognized because she'd felt it herself. He was tall and striking, his suit tailored to perfection, his presence commanding in that effortless way that comes from a lifetime of having doors opened before you reach them. But what caught her attention wasn't his obvious wealth or his handsome face. It was the look in his eyes, tired, searching, almost sad. While everyone around him laughed too loudly and competed for his attention, he seemed to be somewhere else entirely, going through motions he'd performed 1,000 times before. Their eyes met across the room, by pure accident, or perhaps by design if you believe that some meetings are written in the stars before we're born. The moment stretched, and in that suspended space, something shifted. He stopped mid-conversation, excusing himself from a group of people who looked offended that anything could be more important than their presence. He walked toward her with purpose, cutting through the crowd like a ship through still water. And when he stood before her, Zara felt her breath catch in her throat. "I don't think we've met," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, warmer. "We haven't," she replied, finding her voice despite her nervousness. "I'm Zara Okafor. I work in marketing for—" "I don't care where you work," he interrupted gently. And she saw a real smile break across his face for the first time that evening. "I want to know who you are." They talked for hours that night, standing in corners and sitting on balconies, losing track of time as they discovered each other through conversation that felt nothing like the small talk she'd endured at countless professional events. Kofi didn't ask about her connections or her background in the way that usually meant people were calculating her usefulness. Instead, he asked about her dreams, her childhood, the things that made her laugh. She found herself telling him about the village, about her mother's vegetable stand, about reading by candlelight when the power went out, and believing that education could be a bridge between worlds. And he listened, truly listened, in a way that made her understand how rare that was, especially for a man who probably had thousands of people wanting pieces of his attention. He told her things too, not about his wealth or his business empire, but about the weight of expectations, about being seen as a symbol rather than a person, about the loneliness of success that comes with strings attached to everything and everyone. When the gala ended and the staff began cleaning up around them, Kofi asked for her number. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to give it, but because she understood instinctively that saying yes would mean stepping into a world she didn't understand, with rules she hadn't learned and stakes she couldn't measure. But there was something in his eyes, vulnerability, hope, genuine interest, that made her take the risk. She gave him her number, and 3 days later, he called. Not texted, but actually called, his voice warm through the phone, as he asked if she'd have dinner with him. That dinner turned into another, then another, and before she fully understood what was happening, Zara found herself falling in love with a man whose world was so different from hers they might as well have been from different planets. Kofi courted her with a tenderness that surprised them both, as if he'd been waiting his entire life for permission to be gentle. He sent flowers to her office, not roses, but wildflowers from the countryside that reminded her of home and made her cry at her desk while her colleagues whispered. He took her to expensive restaurants where waiters treated him like royalty, then laughed when she insisted on contributing, even though her entire paycheck couldn't cover the wine he ordered without thinking. But more than the grand gestures, it was the small things that won her heart. The way he listened when she talked about her work challenges, actually offering thoughtful advice rather than just throwing money at problems. The way he asked about her mother and brother, remembering details from previous conversations. The way he looked at her, not at her beauty or her body, but at her, seeing something deeper that most people never bothered to search for. He introduced her to his world gradually, taking her to art galleries and business dinners, always staying close, always making sure she felt included, even when the conversations turned to topics she knew nothing about. and she introduced him to hers, bringing him to her tiny apartment, where he sat on her second-hand couch and ate the simple meals she prepared, declaring them better than anything his personal chef had ever made. They found balance between their worlds, or so it seemed. But there was one part of his life Zara hadn't yet encountered, one force she hadn't yet faced. 3 months into their relationship, Kofi asked her to meet his family, and though his voice was casual, she felt the weight behind the request. His mother, he explained, was particular about traditions and expectations. "She just needs to get to know you," he said, with confidence that would prove tragically misplaced. The Mensa d'Estate was a statement of wealth so profound, it made Zara's breath catch in her throat. 50 acres of perfectly maintained grounds, gardens that looked like paintings come to life, a fountain in the main courtyard where water danced in sunlight like liquid diamonds. The house itself was architectural poetry. Modern lines blended with traditional African design elements, floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the outside in, art on the walls that she recognized from textbooks. This wasn't just wealth. This was legacy, power, generations of accumulated success and influence. Zara felt her hands grow clammy as they drove through the gates, and Kofi squeezed her fingers reassuringly. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. "They'll love you." But he was wrong. Abena Mensah stood waiting at the entrance, like a queen receiving subjects, her posture perfect, her clothing expensive enough to feed a village for months. She was beautiful, in the way that aging gracefully requires resources, expertly styled hair, skin maintained by treatments Zara couldn't pronounce, jewelry that caught light and announced wealth with every movement. When Kofi introduced them, Abena's smile was perfect, and her eyes were ice. "Welcome," she said, the word measured and cold, containing multitudes of judgment in a single syllable. The lunch that followed was an interrogation, disguised as polite conversation. Every question Tigayam Abena asked was designed to expose the vast distance between their worlds. "Where did you grow up, dear? What did your father do? Where exactly did you attend university?" Zara answered honestly, watching understanding dawn in the older woman's eyes, not empathy, but calculation. She was being assessed and found wanting, measured against some invisible standard, and failing with every truthful word she spoke. Kofi's sister, Amma, was kinder but cautious, watching the dynamic between her mother and this new woman with obvious concern. His father, when he finally appeared halfway through the meal, seemed kind but distant, the type of man who had long ago ceded domestic authority to his wife in exchange for peace. But it was Abena who orchestrated everything, who set the tone, who made it clear through 1,000 subtle signals that Zara was an intruder in a world where she didn't belong. "My son has responsibilities," Abena said over dessert, her tone conversational, but her message clear. "Our family has a legacy that spans generations, expectations that must be maintained, standards that cannot be compromised." "I understand," Zara replied quietly. Though she understood far more than Abena realized, she understood that this woman saw her as a threat, not to Kofi's happiness, but to her own control. "Do you?" Abena challenged, setting down her fork with precision. "Because love is lovely, dear child, but it doesn't survive the pressures of our world. It doesn't navigate board meetings or social expectations. It doesn't maintain the kind of position we've built over decades." The implication was clear. You are not enough. You will never be enough. And love cannot bridge the gap between who you are and who you need to be. Kofi's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Mother," he said, and there was steel beneath the respect enough. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with all the things unsaid, all the battles yet to be fought. That night, driving back to the city, Kofi apologized profusely, making excuses for his mother's behavior, promising that she would come around with time. But Zara heard what he didn't say. His mother would never accept her, and he knew it. The months that followed were beautiful and terrible in equal measure, joy shadowed by a darkness that grew steadily stronger. Kofi loved her with an intensity that sometimes frightened her because it felt too big, too consuming, like standing in the path of something that could either carry you to heaven or destroy you completely. They traveled together. Paris, where he showed her the Louvre, and she showed him how to find joy in street crepes. Dubai, where the wealth was so ostentatious it became almost meaningless. Zanzibar, where they walked beaches at sunset, and he told her things he'd never told anyone. He wanted to give her the world, to shower her with gifts and experiences, but Zara insisted on maintaining her independence. She kept working despite his offers to take care of everything, kept her apartment despite his penthouse being larger than her entire building, kept sending money home to her mother, despite him offering to buy her family a mansion. This wasn't pride. It was survival instinct, the understanding that the moment she became dependent on him for everything, she would lose the very thing that made him love her in the first place. But while they built their relationship, another force was building too. Abena's disapproval wasn't passive. It was active, strategic, relentless. She didn't scream or make scenes. She was far too sophisticated for that. Instead, she undermined with surgical precision. A comment about Zara's dress at a family function, delivered with a smile that made it impossible to challenge without seeming oversensitive. A suggestion that Kofi should consider dating someone from an appropriate family, made during a family dinner where Zara was present. Questions about Zara's intentions posed to other family members, poisoning the well before Zara even had a chance to fill it. And then the incidents began. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence or bad luck. Zara's work computer crashed spectacularly the day before a major presentation, losing weeks of work that couldn't be recovered. Her car, reliable despite its age, broke down in ways the mechanic described as suspicious, as if someone had deliberately tampered with essential components. The lock on her apartment door stopped working, forcing her to stay in a hotel for 3 nights while getting it replaced. Her bank account was mysteriously frozen for days, some computer error that no one could explain, but that left her unable to access her own money during a period when her mother needed emergency funds. Each incident was explainable on its own, but together they formed a pattern that made Zara's skin prickle with unease. She mentioned it to Kofi, who dismissed her concerns with loving reassurance. "Just bad luck," he said, offering to fix everything, to make all the problems go away, with his money and his influence. But Zara had grown up listening to her grandmother's stories, tales about jealousy that could curdle milk and envy that could poison wells, about forces that moved in shadows, wielded by those who knew the old ways. She began to notice other things too, details that individually meant nothing, but together painted a disturbing picture. The way Abena's eyes would follow her during family gatherings, unblinking and assessing, like a predator watching prey. The strange scent that would linger in rooms after Abena left. Burned herbs and something metallic that made Zara's head ache. The way Kofi's mother would touch certain objects when Zara was near, whispering words too quiet to hear, but that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. "You're being paranoid," her roommate said when she tried to explain. But paranoia is just pattern recognition before you have all the facts. 6 months into their relationship, Kofi proposed in a way that felt like coming home. He didn't do it at a fancy restaurant or with a public spectacle designed to impress. Instead, he brought her back to the village where she grew up, back to the fields where she'd played as a child and dreamed of futures that seemed impossibly far away. They walked through golden grass that brushed their waists under a sky so vast it swallowed your worries, and he told her that he'd spent his entire life in rooms filled with people, but feeling alone until he met her. "You showed me what it means to be real," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught me that success without authenticity is just performance, that wealth without purpose is just accumulation. I don't need you to fit into my world. I need you to let me into yours." Then he knelt in the soil of her childhood, in the place where she'd learned everything important about who she was, and offered her a ring that held a diamond the size of a tear. "Marry me, Zara," he said. "Build a life with me that's ours, not theirs, not what anyone expects, but what we choose together." She said yes through tears that tasted like joy and terror, because she absolutely knew, that this decision would bring the battle she'd been sensing to full open war. Her mother wept with happiness when they told her, clutching them both with hands made strong from years of work. Her brother lifted them off the ground in a hug that felt like flying. The village celebrated with drums and dancing, and food shared freely, treating Kofi not like a billionaire, but like family, which seemed to move him more than anything money had ever bought. But when they told Abina, the temperature dropped so fast, Zara could see her breath. "I see," was all Abina said, those two words carrying more weight than paragraphs could convey. Then she excused herself, claiming a headache, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had thickened. Kofi tried to follow her, but his father stopped him with a hand on his shoulder and a shake of his head. "Let her process," the older man said quietly, but there was something in his eyes, concern, maybe even fear, that Zara didn't understand until later. That night, alone in her study surrounded by expensive things that had never brought her joy, Abana Mensah made a phone call that would change everything. The number belonged to a woman who lived in the old district, in a house that no one visited casually, where the air smelled of smoke and secrets, and the walls held whispers of things that science couldn't explain. This woman's grandmother had taught her grandmother's grandmother the ways of binding and breaking, of influencing the world through means that existed in the spaces between what people believed possible. Her name was never spoken aloud by those who knew, only referenced in careful euphemisms and sidelong glances. Abina had promised herself she would never resort to such things, that she was too modern, too educated, too sophisticated for the old ways. But desperation makes liars of us all, and Abina was desperate. "I need your help," she said into the phone, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My son is making a terrible mistake with a girl who will destroy everything we've built. I need to ensure that doesn't happen." The voice on the other end was ancient and knowing, carrying the weight of generations. "What are you willing to pay?" it asked. And Abina didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes," she replied, sealing a bargain that would cost far more than she imagined. The engagement party was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Mensah estate, an event designed to introduce Zara properly to society and cement her position in Kofi's world. 300 guests were invited, business leaders and politicians, celebrities, and old money families, everyone who mattered in their circles. An orchestra was flown in from Vienna, flowers imported from Ecuador, every detail curated to absolute perfection, because Abina Mensah did nothing by halves. Zara stood in the guest room preparing herself, staring at a reflection she barely recognized. The dress was custom-made, midnight blue silk, that flowed like water, with delicate gold embroidery along the bodice that caught light when she moved. Her hair was styled by professionals into an elegant updo, small gold pins scattered through it like captured stars. Her makeup was flawless, applied by hands more skilled than her own. She looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and power, like she'd been born to wear silk and diamonds. But inside, she felt like the village girl playing dress-up, an imposter who would be exposed the moment she opened her mouth. Then she smelled it. That scent again. Burned herbs and metal. And something else she couldn't identify. But that made her stomach turn. It was stronger this time, almost overwhelming, coming from somewhere in the room, though she couldn't identify the source. She looked around frantically, but saw nothing unusual, just expensive furniture and fresh flowers and mirrors that reflected back her growing panic. "Did you smell that?" she asked Amma, who had come to walk her down. But Kofi's sister shook her head in confusion. "Smell what?" Amma replied, genuine concern in her eyes. Zara dismissed it as nerves, but as they descended the grand staircase toward the party, a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she had to grip the railing to keep from falling. The party was magnificent in the way that unlimited resources can create. Gardens lit with thousands of tiny lights, music floating on warm evening air, champagne flowing like water, laughter echoing across grounds that seemed to stretch forever. Guests filled every space, dressed in clothes that cost more than most people earned in years, moving with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned their place in the world. Kofi stood waiting at the bottom of the stairs, looking like a prince from the stories her mother used to tell. And when he saw her descending, his face transformed with joy so pure it made her heart ache. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, taking her hand, and for a moment she believed that everything would be okay, that love could triumph over whatever forces were moving against them. They moved through the crowd together, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Kofi keeping her close and whispering things that made her laugh, despite her growing unease. But something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her head felt too heavy for her neck, in the way her vision would blur at the edges before snapping back into focus. Her heart raced without reason, her hands trembled uncontrollably, and every time she looked up, she found Abina watching her, with those cold, calculating eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. As the evening progressed, the symptoms worsened in ways that couldn't be dismissed as simple nerves. During the speeches, her hands shook so badly, she had to hide them in the folds of her dress. During dinner, everything tasted wrong, bitter, metallic, like her tongue had been coated in copper. When Kofi noticed her distress, she blamed it on overwhelming circumstances, but the worry in his eyes told her he wasn't convinced. Halfway through the evening, Zara excused herself to find a bathroom, moving through hallways that seemed to tilt and sway beneath her feet. She gripped walls for balance, her breath coming in short gasps, her reflection in passing mirrors, looking pale and drawn, like she was being drained from the inside out. That's when she heard voices coming from a room down the hall. Abina's voice and another, older, unfamiliar, sending chills down her spine, despite the warm evening. Zara moved closer, her instincts overriding her reason, and through a crack in the door, she saw them. Abina stood with an elderly woman, dressed in traditional cloth, her face lined with age and knowledge that looked almost frightening in its intensity. Between them on a small table was a leather pouch, and inside that pouch, Zara could see herbs, twisted roots, and something that looked disturbingly like a lock of her own hair. "It's working," Abina said, satisfaction dripping from every word. "She's weakening just as you promised. By tomorrow she'll be too ill to continue. By next week, my son will see her as the burden she truly is." "This is dark work you've asked for," the old woman replied, her voice like dried leaves scraping stone. "There are consequences to binding another's spirit, to poisoning their essence from within. What we send out returns threefold. This is the law that cannot be broken. I don't care about consequences, Abina snapped, her mask of sophistication cracking to reveal something ugly beneath. I care about my son's future, about our family's legacy, about ensuring that girl doesn't drag him down to her level. She's beneath us, and I will not watch her destroy everything we've built. As you wish, the old woman said. But remember what I've told you when the darkness you've invited finds its way home. Zara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that threatened to escape and reveal her presence. It was real. All of it. Not paranoia or coincidence or bad luck, but deliberate, calculated evil, wielded by a woman who saw love as a threat to be eliminated. Abena had been using dark magic against her, poisoning her spirit, manipulating forces beyond understanding to break her down from within. The illness, the accidents, the overwhelming dread that had shadowed her for months, all of it was orchestrated by a woman who valued control more than her own son's happiness. Fear crashed over Zara like a wave, threatening to drown her. But beneath the fear something else stirred. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but the cold, focused kind that sees clearly and refuses to back down. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, wisdom passed down through generations. The strongest magic in the world is not found in potions or spells, child. It's found in a pure heart that refuses to be broken, in truth that cannot be hidden, in light that darkness cannot extinguish. Zara steadied herself against the wall, taking deep breaths despite the poison working through her system, despite the fear threatening to overwhelm her. She had a choice in this moment. She could run, could disappear, could protect herself by removing herself from the situation entirely. Or she could stand, could fight, could face this darkness with the only weapon she truly possessed, her truth. The decision came not from her head, but from her heart, from the place where her mother's lessons lived, from the foundation built by years of choosing integrity over convenience. She would not run. She would not be broken. She would stand in her truth and let that truth illuminate everything, no matter the cost. Zara turned and walked back to the party, each step deliberate, despite her trembling legs, despite the poison making her head swim and her vision blur. She found Kofi immediately, his face transforming with relief when he saw her, then concern when he registered her expression. I need to speak with everyone, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Now. It's important. Confusion crossed his face, but he trusted her, signaling the band to stop, gradually bringing the party to a halt, as 300 faces turned toward them with curiosity and confusion. Abena appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face carefully neutral, but Zara saw the flash of panic in her eyes. Thank you all for being here tonight, Zara began, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden. For celebrating what we thought was a joyous occasion, the beginning of a new chapter, a union built on love. She paused, gathering strength. I want to tell you all a story about two women. One who came from nothing and built herself through hard work and integrity, and one who had everything but was willing to use darkness to maintain control. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers beginning to ripple through them. One woman saw love as a threat because it couldn't be controlled, couldn't be purchased, couldn't be manipulated. So she reached for forces older than civilization, hired someone who deals in poisons and bindings and curses, and tried to destroy what she couldn't dominate. Gasps erupted, people looking around in confusion and shock. Abena stepped forward, her voice sharp. Stop this right now. You're not well. You're having some kind of breakdown. I'm poisoned, Zara said flatly. and the crowd erupted in chaos. Your mother hired someone to work dark magic against me, to make me sick, to break me down, to make your son see me as a burden, so he would leave me. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Kofi's face went through a dozen emotions in seconds: disbelief, horror, fury, heartbreak, before settling on cold determination. "Show me," he said quietly, but his voice carried steel that made everyone fall silent. "Show me now." They moved as a group toward the house, 300 guests following like witnesses to history, their expensive clothes and cultivated sophistication forgotten in the face of real drama. Zara led them to the study, where she'd seen Abena and the old woman, praying that the evidence would still be there, that she hadn't imagined it all in her poisoned state. The door swung open, and there they were, Abena and the ancient woman, caught mid-ritual, the leather pouch open on the table with its damning contents visible to everyone. Herbs and roots and hair and things that made people recoil in horror, materials for working magic that most of them had dismissed as superstition, until this moment, when it was undeniable and right in front of them. Kofi stood frozen in the doorway, staring at his mother, at the woman who had raised him, trying to reconcile the person he thought he knew with the evidence before his eyes. "Get out," he said to the old woman, his voice deadly quiet. "Take your things and leave now." The woman gathered her materials with practiced efficiency and fled, leaving only Abena standing there, her mask of sophistication completely shattered. "Son, I can explain," she began, but Kofi held up a hand to stop her. "Explain," he repeated, his voice cracking. "Explain how you tried to destroy the woman I love. Explain how you used dark magic to poison her. Explain how you valued your pride more than my happiness, your control more than my future." "I was protecting you," Abena cried, composure dissolving into desperation. "From someone who will drain your resources, embarrass our family, lower our standing in society. She is the best thing that ever happened to me," Kofi roared, and the room shook with his fury. Kofi's voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting, a quiet intensity that made everyone lean in to hear. "She made me remember what it means to be human instead of just wealthy, to feel instead of perform, to love without calculation or agenda. She saw me, not my bank account or my business or my last name, but me, the person beneath all the expectations and responsibilities. And you, mother, you tried to take that away with your jealousy and your toxic need for control and your willingness to poison another human being because she didn't meet your arbitrary standards." Abena's tears were flowing now, but they were tears of rage and fear, not remorse. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her true nature finally visible. "When she drags you down, when you lose everything because you chose some village girl over your own family." "I already lost everything," Kofi interrupted, his voice breaking. "I lost my mother. Because the woman standing in front of me, the woman who hired someone to work dark magic against an innocent person, who poisoned the woman I love out of petty jealousy, that woman is not the mother I thought I knew. She's someone I don't recognize, someone I don't want to know." The silence that followed was absolute. 300 witnesses to the complete destruction of a family dynasty, to the exposure of darkness that had been hiding behind expensive clothes and cultivated sophistication. Then Zara spoke, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the tension, like light through shadow. "I'm sorry," she said, and everyone turned to look at her in shock that she would apologize in this moment. "I'm sorry that you couldn't see. I never wanted to take him from you, that I wanted to love him alongside you, to be family rather than competition. I'm sorry that you were so consumed by fear of losing control, that you couldn't see what you were actually losing. Your son's respect, your daughter's trust, your own humanity. She paused, and despite the poison still working through her system, despite her exhaustion, she stood tall, with a dignity that made Abina's expensive elegance look cheap by comparison. My grandmother taught me that darkness can never defeat light. It can only show us where light is needed. You tried to break me with your magic and your money and your status, but you forgot something important. She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. I am my mother's daughter, raised by a woman who taught me that worth comes from character, not circumstance. That strength is measured in how you treat others when you have power over them. That true wealth is found in integrity that can't be purchased or destroyed. You tried to poison my body, but you couldn't touch my spirit because it's built on a foundation you've never understood. Truth, dignity, and the unshakable knowledge of my own value. The words resonated through the room, and people who had come expecting a celebration found themselves witnessing something far more profound. A young woman standing in her power, not through retaliation, but through grace, through choosing light, even when darkness would have been justified. Kofi took Zara's hand and led her out of that study, out of that house, past the shocked guests and ruined celebration, into the cool night air that felt like absolution after the suffocating tension inside. Behind them, Abena collapsed into a chair, surrounded by the ruins of everything she'd tried to protect. Her reputation shattered, her family fractured, her carefully constructed world demolished by her own actions. The guests dispersed in uncomfortable silence, their phones already out, the story already spreading through social circles like wildfire, because scandal travels faster than grace. Kofi drove Zara straight to the hospital, where doctors found traces of toxic herbs in her bloodstream. Nothing fatal, but enough to cause serious harm, enough to require treatment and monitoring. He never left her side, holding her hand through examinations and treatments, his face a mask of guilt and rage and helplessness. I should have seen it, he kept saying. I should have protected you. But Zara squeezed his hand and smiled despite her exhaustion. You did protect me, she replied, by loving me enough to believe me when I told you the truth, by choosing me over comfort and family pressure, and everything you've ever known. That's all I needed. The scandal rocked their social circles for weeks, the story becoming legend. The billionaire's mother, who used dark magic to destroy her son's relationship. The village girl who stood up to power, with nothing but truth as her weapon. Abena became a pariah overnight, invitations drying up, business associates distancing themselves. The legacy she'd tried so desperately to protect crumbling under the weight of her own actions. But for Zara and Kofi, it marked the beginning of something new. Something built not on appearances or expectations, but on a foundation that could weather any storm because it was built on truth. 3 months passed, and Zara healed completely, the poison leaving her system and taking with it any lingering doubt about her strength or her place in Kofi's life. They postponed the wedding, choosing instead to build their relationship slowly and carefully, on bedrock instead of sand, learning each other without the pressure of society's expectations or family drama. Kofi made changes too, severing business relationships with anyone who had supported or enabled his mother's behavior, using his wealth and influence not to control, but to create space for authenticity and truth. They split their time between the city and the countryside, Kofi learning to find joy in simplicity, while Zara learned that wealth could be used for good when wielded with intention rather than ego. She started programs for rural children, using his resources and her vision, creating opportunities that she'd once only dreamed of for kids who reminded her of herself. And then one afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at Zara's childhood home. Abena, looking smaller somehow, less imposing, the weight of her actions visible in every line of her face. Zara considered turning her away, would have been justified in doing so, but curiosity and perhaps something deeper made her step aside and let the older woman in. They sat in her mother's simple living room, surrounded by love that had nothing to do with money, and for the first time, Abena seemed to truly see what she'd been too blind to notice before. "This is a beautiful home," Abena said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual authority. "Full of love. You can feel it in the walls, in the air, in everything. I convinced myself I was protecting my son, but I was really protecting myself from change, from the realization that I'd built my entire life on things that don't actually matter, status and appearance, and control over things that were never mine to control." Abena continued, her words coming slowly, as if each one cost her something. "You terrified me because you had something I'd lost decades ago and didn't even know was missing. Authenticity, the ability to be loved for who you are, rather than what you can provide or control. Watching my son look at you with genuine love reminded me of a version of myself I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten she existed. A young woman who married for love, before that love got buried under expectations and social climbing, and the constant need to prove our worth through external validation. So I tried to bury you instead, tried to destroy what I couldn't understand, and in doing so, I buried any chance of real relationship with my children, with myself, with the life I could have had if I'd chosen differently." Zara listened without interrupting, seeing before her not a villain, but a broken woman, finally forced to confront the consequences of her choices. "I can't undo what I did," Abena said, tears streaming down her face, without the usual concern for appearance. "I can't take back the poison, or the pain, or the cruelty. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see your strength, and your grace, and your worth. And I'm sorry it took me losing everything to finally open my eyes." Zara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, understanding that what she said next would define not just this conversation, but her own path forward. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not now, maybe not ever, because what you did was cruel and dangerous and came from a place of such deep ugliness that I'm still processing it. But I also won't carry hatred for you in my heart, not because you deserve my mercy, but because I deserve my peace. So I release you not for your sake, but for mine, not as forgiveness, but as freedom from the burden of bitterness." Time passed and life moved forward the way it always does, with healing that comes in layers and lessons that sink in slowly. Zara and Kofi married in the countryside, under a canopy of wildflowers and silk, surrounded by people who loved them for who they were, rather than what they represented. They built a life that honored both their worlds, spending time in the city, pursuing business and opportunities, spending time in the village, staying connected to roots and values that money couldn't purchase. They had children who grew up understanding that worth comes from character, that wealth is a tool, not an identity, that the measure of a person is found in how they treat others when they have power over them. Abena lived out her days in quiet solitude at the family's beach house, never fully reconciling with her children, but doing something unexpected with her isolation. She began volunteering at a women's shelter, using her resources to help women escape situations where they felt powerless, perhaps seeking some kind of redemption through action, if not relationship. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, the wounds too deep for that, but it was acknowledgement that people can change when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Years later, when Zara's daughters asked about that difficult time, she told them the truth without sugarcoating or dramatizing, explaining that sometimes the people who should love us most are too broken by their own fears to love us properly. But the lesson isn't to become hard or bitter, she told them. It's to choose grace even when you have every right to choose revenge, to respond to darkness with light, not because it's easy, but because it's who you want to be when you look in the mirror. And in the end, through all the poison and pain and battles fought in visible and invisible realms, Zara learned the most important lesson of all, that love built on truth, respect, and unwavering integrity is the greatest treasure of all, worth more than any wealth, more powerful than any magic, more enduring than any legacy built on control or fear. She learned that your worth cannot be determined by someone else's fear, that your light cannot be extinguished by another's darkness unless you give them that power, and that the strongest magic in the world is a pure heart that refuses to be broken by cruelty, a spirit that chooses compassion even when vengeance is justified, a woman who knows her value and won't let anyone, not wealth or status or dark forces, make her forget it.